Welcome. We wanted to welcome everyone to our webinar tonight about prevailing winds, silencing scholars and reclaiming the public discourse. Tonight we have an excellent panel for you who are going to discuss about the current issues that are facing both teachers and academia and the attempts to silence them today. So as to begin them, again, welcome everyone. Our first question that would like all the panelists, we have several questions panelists will answer in a second. And our president, Sarah Des Moines, can't be here tonight, so I'll do a quick introduction of SSEC. SSEC is an organization that was created for the purpose of bringing all the social sciences together to promote education and to promote academic freedom and to seek ways in which we can deepen the learning of our students, both in K through 12 and secondary education. So to begin our panel then, I want to ask the first question and I sent these to the panelists. And when you, and we'll go in order, we'll start with Anthony and then Bailey and then Jesse and then Wesley. When I introduce you, if you could just give us a quick biography, where you are, what you do, introduce yourself, and then we'll proceed to answering the first question. And the first question we're asking tonight is, what are your greatest concerns with this wave of restrictive educational legislation?
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Anthony Farag. I'm a teacher at Westfield High School and also a lecturer at Rutgers University. I've been teaching at Westfield for 18 years this year. And Bailey and I teach an interdisciplinary course predicated on critical thinking, and it lends itself to critical race theory in the way that we kind of teach it. And in Westfield, New Jersey, it's a predominantly white district. And a lot of our work involves teaching social justice, anti-racist, critical thinking with regard to race in a setting where a lot of our students are coming in with ideas coming from home, which may be hostile toward that approach. So that's where we're kind of coming from. And I guess the question, Dean, can you repeat it again? Just so I have my bit.
Yes, of course I can. The question is, what are your greatest concerns with this wave of restrictive educational legislation?
I think for me, it's twofold. Like you were saying a little earlier, it's an attack on intellectual freedom. It's an attack on academic freedom that only serves to stunt us as a country, as a civilization, if you want to take it to that level. Our job as educators is to prepare our students for a very complicated world. And if they don't understand the nuances of a complicated world with the aid of sophisticated academic theories based on research, then we're just doing them a disservice, and we're leaving them to the wolves in a globalizing world where there's different groups of people, different cultures, different races, different ethnicities, all interacting with each other. And from our perspective, teaching in a predominantly white school that a lot of times has been described, the town itself of Westfield, New Jersey, has been described by many as like a bubble, as like a cave in which students don't understand the reality of the world, given the privileges for a lot of them already have, and they can live a life in which they don't have to interact with the world in any critical way. I feel like that as educators, we are hurting our students by not preparing them for the next level of understanding the world at large. So that's the primary kind of concern, where first, all of our work is primarily there to help students prepare themselves for a globalizing world, and the intellectual freedom can be hampered that will not allow us to do that. And then also, there's decades, especially with regard to critical race theory, there's decades of research and theory and all of the hard work academians have done over the course of the past few decades that essentially is being threatened by media pundits and people who don't really understand the nuances of it. And then it becomes politicized, and then we get silenced as educators, and it hurts us all across the board. So those are my, I guess, my primary concerns with regards to the culture war that we're approaching right now.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having us. My name is Bailey. As Anthony said, he and I teach together in Westfield, New Jersey, which again is predominantly white. It's fairly affluent. It's a suburb of New York City. And like Anthony said, a lot of our students are, the word that comes to mind is sheltered, in a way that inhibits them from interacting with people that they're going to encounter when they leave the bubble of Westfield High School. So I guess to answer the question, Dean, and again, it's what are your greatest concerns?
Yes. What is your greatest concern with this wave of restrictive educational legislation?
So to echo a lot of what Anthony said, it's frightening and it's disheartening that decades of research are being ignored and are being stifled very intentionally through legislation that does not only our students, but it does the nation, the world, a great disservice in terms of our progress as a nation, as a culture, and then also as local communities within education. And then, of course, the biggest loss is on the student. So I don't need to tell teachers that there's this presumption that a lot of us don't know what we're doing, even though we're licensed, we're trained. A lot of us are working really hard and continue to do so to become better and better educators and to provide our students with the best education that we possibly could. There's a fear that I have too in this very globalized and very digitized society that we occupy, is that we're not leaving the education of truth to our students. And if we're stifling that through legislation, our students are they're not given the opportunity to explore knowledge, truth, history, literature, culture, language, etc., through experts. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to explore this knowledge on their phones and in their own communities. And as we all know, everybody's going to exist in their own digitized silo where we're going to continually be fed our own confirmation biases. And unless we're doing this in a space where you have professionals that are able to help students navigate and come to their own conclusions, not to indoctrinate students, but to present information, to provide learning opportunities, students are going to do this exploration of what they think would be knowledge, but really is just opinions that exist in the ether of the internet. So to me, that's another great fear, is that rather than leave learning to people that are, we would hope, right, are good at teaching and have the training, have the experience, and have the ability to help young people form their ability to think critically and to evaluate information and history, literature, culture, language on their own, they're going to do this in a very informal, vast space of the digital landscape where they're not going to be learning. Instead, they're going to be absorbing opinion.
Yes. Thank you so much, Anthony and Bailey. Agree with so much of what you're putting forward, and happy to be here with you all in this struggle for truth. My name is Jesse Hagopian. I am a teacher in Seattle. I taught at my alma mater, Garfield High School, for over a decade, and I've been a teacher for over 20 years. And I also work with the Zen Education Project, helping to lead the Teaching for Black Lives campaign based on the book that I co-edited with that title. And I'm also in the Black Lives Matter at School movement as well. And I just think that it's staggering that we have now 44 states in this country that have introduced legislation that would require educators to lie to students about U.S. history. Specifically, it would require them to deceive students about structural racism, sexism, heterosexism. Some 18 states have already passed these laws, and there are dozens of local school districts all across the country, north and south, quote, red state or blue state, has school districts that have banned the truth as well. A bill was proposed in Arkansas to ban the teaching of solidarity, right? We have in Oklahoma, there was a bill that called for, quote, prohibiting teaching certain concepts pertaining to American slavery including, quote, that one race is the unique oppressor in the institution of slavery, and that, quote, another race is the unique victim in the institution of slavery. So if this law is enacted, you can still teach about slavery, but you just can't teach that white people enslaved Black people in this country. This is the chilling reality of America in 2023 that's rapidly looking more like 1984, when you can just have this kind of doublespeak be mandated. In Florida, teachers who are caught allowing students to access banned books that deal with issues of race or gender or sexuality are risking up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. It comes with a third-degree felony, right? So you asked me what my greatest concern was. My greatest concern is that we are rapidly entering a political period not dissimilar to the Cold War era, in the 40s and 50s, when the overlapping Red Scare and Lavender Scare were inflicted upon the population to implement severe political repression. In a survey that the Zen Education Project did, one Florida social studies teacher told us that this is creating a chilling effect, and she said, quote, "We will continue to teach the truth, but with much less certainty about what the consequences will be for doing so." Another teacher reported that they were terrified to say anything about enslavement because it might make students feel uncomfortable, right, which is now against the law. And this teacher said also that, quote, "they can't recommend any books because a parent might not like it, and then I could be charged with a felony," right? So during the Red Scare, thousands of teachers were fired around the country after being labeled a communist. There were 400 teachers in New York City alone that were fired, and there were incredible repression on anybody interested in the Black freedom struggle, in the labor movement, but especially against teachers. And it was also not long after President Eisenhower took office in 1953 that he issued the Executive Order 10450, which barred LGBTQ plus people from federal employment. And that just created open season on queer people in general, but specifically on LGBTQ plus educators. And the attack was particularly vicious in Florida. In 1956, Florida officials created the Johns Committee, which led a homophobic crusade against queer school teachers that resulted in interrogating, firing, even revoking their teaching certificates, so that by 1963, the committee had actually revoked the licenses of 71 teachers and identified another 100 suspects in this crusade. So I think today, just like the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare were used to purge teachers, the attack on what these history deniers have labeled critical race theory and gender ideology are being used today to fire educators and exclude discussions about structural racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, right? And the Washington Post has already identified that over 160 educators have lost their jobs, been pushed out or reassigned because they taught about race or LGBTQ plus issues. So we are rapidly descending into one of the worst eras of political repression in US history. And we are at a crossroads and a critical moment where we can either stand up and build the kind of struggle that ended McCarthyism, and that was the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the women's rights movement, the student movement that ended that particular era, or we can allow our society to return to those dreadful days.
And Wesley?
Thank you, Dean and SSEC, for the invitation today. I'm Wesley Hedgepeth. I am a history and politics teacher in Richmond, Virginia. I'm also the president-elect of the National Council for the Social Studies. I couldn't agree more with my three colleagues and what they said. And if I was to think about my greatest concerns, I would distill it into really 3 points. One is really the dangerous restriction of the freedom of speech and of expression. And as an example, thinking about the LGBTQIA plus population not being able to be asked their pronouns. One of the greatest and easiest ways to show students that you hear and see them is to ask them what they want to be called. And that piece applies to people of all identities. And really, I think that is just, we need to let our students know, and the LGBTQ community as a whole, that we see them, we value them, we recognize them as outstanding contributors to our world. That also applies to all of our other identities. Number 2 is that all of the progress that we've made in teaching a more complete history is in danger. A return to the tradition of not teaching the entire history is really what we're witnessing, and Jesse mentioned that earlier, that these systemic issues like slavery and racism aren't being able to be addressed correctly. Divisive concepts are really just a thinly veiled attempt to further silence the voice of historically marginalized groups. What is being taught, like I think it might have been Bailey that mentioned this, is not going to match the lived experiences of these students. They are going to see in life, whether that's on social media and in the news and in their personal experiences, the truth. Yet their teachers aren't allowed to acknowledge that. And what is that going to do to our reputation as academics, as professionals? And speaking of professionals, the third bucket I would say is that our professionalism is at risk. Our jobs are at risk. In some parts of the country, we aren't even welcome to share parts of our identity with our students, which it leads to connections that are unique to teachers and students. We're at risk, of course, teaching anything that might be seen as divisive. And of course, then teachers will shy away from that. Even if it may be not explicitly prohibited, they are certainly concerned that their job is at risk. There's really a general lack of trust and respect of our professionalism, no matter how many advanced degrees we have, no matter how many years of experience we have. We cannot be trusted to create our own instructional materials even. In the latest draft of the Virginia SOL standards, the Youngkin administration even put in the preface that teacher created material was unnecessary. Of course, this top-down approach of a canned experience, essentially boiling us down to facilitators and nothing more. So simply put, teachers are at risk simply by teaching.
Thank you. Those are excellent answers to that initial question. I'd like to transition to our second question then we have for our panel, which is, how are you and our other organizations you see challenging the legislation that is in place? And how are we challenging the current bills in state legislators and during this spring, during that are coming up in the spring session? And if anybody would like to jump in, more than welcome to. So we have the 2-part question. How are you and your organization challenging the legislation that has taken place? Or how are you challenging the current bills in state legislatures this spring session?
Well, Dean, NCSS releases statements on its own and signs on to partner coalition statements condemning legislation that threatens best practices in teaching and learning. In 2016, we released a statement on academic freedom in the social studies educator, saying, quote, academic freedom means that the political, religious, and philosophical beliefs of politicians, administrators, and members of the public cannot be imposed on students or faculty, unquote. And we affirmed this again later on in a joint statement with our partners, the National Council for the Teachers of English, of Mathematics, and of Science, as well as the National Coalition Against Censorship. We said, quote, teachers need our support. They need our trust. They need to have freedom to exercise their professional judgment, unquote. Therefore, again, we're committed to this idea of inclusive and complete education. We support educators with relevant professional development opportunities, such as our 103rd annual conference in Nashville. We're really highlighting a constant through line for NCSS, and the fact that we are providing educators with what they need, not simply what might be politically expedient. We also have our advocacy toolkit, which is open access for anyone seeking guidance for advocacy and informed civic action. In addition to our annual conference, we're also hosting a summer leadership institute in Richmond this July, the 10th and 11th, which will focus on uncovering hidden histories and advocating for local issues.
Right on. That's great work. So glad you're doing that. I wanted to just highlight a little bit of the work that's being done at Rethinking Schools. I'm an editor with Rethinking Schools magazine and the Zinn Education Project and Teaching for Change. We are all in this struggle to try to build the movement to allow educators to teach truth. One of the ways we do that is organizing study groups around the book Teaching for Black Lives that Rethinking Schools put out. We have organized hundreds of study groups around the country, including in states where it's illegal to teach the truth about structural racism. And we've worked with some courageous educators in these states who have collectively come together to use the book as an anchor text to discuss the ways that racism shows up in the curriculum, in the corporate textbooks, and what the anti-racist alternatives to those racist narratives are. But also they want to talk about how do we oppose these laws that are trying to silence our ability to teach the truth. And so these study groups have been an inspiration to me to see educators in Florida, in Iowa, in many of these states where it is dangerous to teach the truth, come together has been really exciting to see. Another one of our main initiatives has been partnering with Beacon Press to get the book, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, into as many classrooms as possible. So we've issued hundreds and hundreds of copies of that book to teachers all over the country, including in places where they could get in trouble for teaching the truth about Rosa Parks, because it turns out that Rosa Parks wasn't just tired one day and refused to get up, right? As the master narrative about her life is told. Instead, Rosa Parks was a lifelong activist, and this book tells the story of Rosa Parks before the Montgomery bus boycott, when she organized campaigns against sexual assault of Black women. It tells the story of the boycott for sure, but it also tells the story after the boycott, when she moved to Detroit and fought against structural racism in the North and organized against police violence in the North, when she joined the Black Power movement in the North and befriended Malcolm X, who she thought was one of her favorite leaders in America. And these are all things that are forbidden to talk about in too many classrooms. But if we want our young people to know how to organize for a better society, if we want them to understand how people in the civil rights movement made change, then we actually have to study the full lessons of people like Rosa Parks's life. And that's what we're helping to deliver. And just lastly, I am really excited about the upcoming National Day of Action to Teach Truth. That's on June 10th, 2023. And an incredible group of organizations has come together to help create this National Day of Action. It's being coordinated by the Zinn Education Project, Black Lives Matter at School, and the African American Policy Forum. but it's already been co-sponsored by the National Education Association, Learning for Justice, the 1619 Project, Education Network, Speak Out, AFT, Share My Lesson, and so many others. And I believe that this year's National Day of Action promises to be the largest that we've ever had since this full-on attack of critical race theory began. And I expect that many hundreds of educators all across the country in dozens and dozens of cities will be rallying to repeal these anti-truth laws. And you know, the idea behind these rallies is to pick a historic site in your community, some place that tells us something about the Black freedom struggle, about struggles for LGBTQ plus equality, and use those sites to teach people about the struggles that made whatever democratic freedoms we have today possible, and to talk about what's lost when we have educational gag orders imposed on educators. So I hope that everyone will join us on June 10th and build a rally in their own community. And if you go to the Zinn Education Project website, you can get the full toolkit for how to select a historic site, plan an event in your community, sign up for our toolkit and our media workshops.
Anthony or Bailey?
I guess in our avenue as teachers, we're our operation is from the ground up, where we write curriculum that is trying to influence students to really think for themselves, teach truth in the sense of understanding the truth for yourself, from the level of the high school level, as well as into grad school, where this past fall, Bailey and I taught a course through Rutgers University that was specifically meant to navigate these types of conflicts for teachers, to help teachers navigate these types of conflicts in their communities, understand things theoretically. And really, that course's approach is to know our enemy, know the strategies, the thought process and philosophies of those who want to fight against us, their motivations, etc. Because again, in a predominantly white district where there's active, not majority of the population, but an active, a loud minority of the population of the town that wants to stifle freedom of thought, freedom of academic freedom. Our goal was to try to help teachers navigate the culture war strategically, and that's how we try to approach it. And from there, obviously, it would influence the students that the teachers that took our course would teach. And then we teach seniors, so we're teaching voting members of the population. Many of our students, either in the beginning of the year or throughout the year, just got the right to vote, becoming very powerful members of the world and U.S. society. So those are kind of our approach, I guess, our approaches from one angle, from the ground up, in that sense.
Here's a story. Here's an example of what this looks like. So with regard to writing curriculum, Anthony and I will design curriculum whose language for objectives say things like, how has the government impacted marginalized communities through legislation, versus what was it, Anthony? How has the government oppressed marginalized communities through legislation? And the difference in wording for us is impact versus oppress. And that's how curriculum is passed. And there's a stark difference between those two words. However, there is not a stark difference in the history of what those two words imply.
And one fundamental approach that we weave in our classes, both to our students and to the teachers that we taught in that course, was the idea that you frame everything as everybody loses in systems of oppression. It's not a zero-sum game. We all lose, and if we understand it from that standpoint, we can become more unified. And one of the things that we're aware of when we teach is that a lot of these discussions surrounding social justice, surrounding teaching the truth, a lot of times we're talking to ourselves or preaching to the choir. And we need to kind of get into the mindset of those who would be opposed to understanding, the real nuances of critical race theory, thinking about themselves critically, racially, etc. And framing it as everybody loses in systems of oppression allows us to connect with students. They'll be like, whoa, wait a second, how come I didn't understand it this way? And how come I'm losing? Because our society has been structured on racism. And how much better could our society be if it wasn't? And those are some of our approaches and how to navigate these kinds of contentious issues.
I have to say I love that approach. Thank you for sharing that anecdote. There was a study that was released in social ed in our last issue that said in 2021, at least 35% of all students in the U.S. were in districts that were impacted by local efforts to limit teaching about diversity-related themes such as race, racism, sexual orientation, gender identity. As Anthony and Bailey mentioned, these are students who are already voting or are participating in civic life one way or another, or will be doing that very soon. So even in these districts where the teachers are strapped for what they can actually teach, we do need to offer our students frameworks that they can then become experts in and use that in their life, such as how to participate in civil dialogue, and the use of say something like sentence starters that I love to use with my students when learning to disagree with one another or learning to challenge someone's statement in a way that's productive. And of course, the topics, as Anthony and Bailey mentioned, the questions can be phrased in a way that is more safe for the educator, but still is going to give the students the practice that they need before they leave the classroom. It's a real shame because, as you all know, right, that our classrooms are the safest place for this to happen, and that's being taken away. So we really have to again provide these frameworks. And so I think especially our pre-service teachers, young teachers who don't have that toolkit or don't have the tenure per se or the confidence to be able to approach these issues, they really still need to have those skills as well.
Excellent. So one of the things that many members of SSEC do is prepare future teachers for teaching in a challenging environment. In what ways do you think we as teacher educators could do a better job of preparing our future teachers for this challenging environment?
I think it's a combination of things. I personally am a lot of times conflicted with regard to, I'm a teacher educator myself. I teach at Rutgers University future social studies teachers, and literally last night's class, I was explaining to my students that you are entering in a wide open job market because there's such a teacher shortage, but at the same time, one of the fundamental reasons why it's wide open is because of the culture war that you're actually entering as well. And in my mind, I wonder back and forth about how much we need, how essential it is to teach pre-service teachers, but at the same time, make sure they are protected. I feel like a lot of times the veteran teachers are the ones that need to shoulder this burden and make sure until the new teachers get tenure, they are protected in this culture war. And so those are things that bounce around my head, and the conflict that we have to kind of approach that type of question with, because it's easy to fight a war when, you know, we can tell future teachers to, you know, teach the truth to whatever degree, but if they're really on the front lines without the protections that veteran tenure teachers have, it's a different game for them. So those are things that we need to kind of be aware of in general, I think.
I want to jump in here and also talk about teachers that are in practice already. I love these points that Anthony brought up about pre-service teachers. The other thing is we're in a position of employment where we're rewarded to stay in the same spot as long as possible. And oftentimes, I don't know about districts all over the country, but from bits and pieces of teachers that I'm talking to in other districts, it's not and my experience too, it's not the easiest thing in the world to go out and get your own professional development from an established institution that gives you the proper gradation and preparation that you need to address some of these contentious issues within your local communities. So, for example, a veteran teacher is rewarded to stay in the district as long as possible, right? When we move from district to district, you get that built-in PD, and it's usually at little to no cost to a new teacher. However, for teachers that have been in practice for a long time, it comes out of our own pocket for the most part. Not only that, it's also at your expense of time. I'm really interested in expanding the market of professional development for teachers to prepare them for conversations that they may have not had to have had within their careers of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years as practicing teachers. I would love to see more partnership with higher education, working with local schools and localizing that learning within those school communities. It would, within this idea of PD, it would be great for everybody to go out and get PD at, whatever the best university at the most effective cost is as possible. But then also to localize all of that learning within the community that you're in and out of every day is going to be most beneficial for teachers. The students that you see every day have a vast and nuanced culture within their school, within their homes, within the town. And until all of these very complex things are happening in a way that makes it easy and also effective for teachers to learn and to develop their craft, I wonder if we're doing our teachers the justice that they deserve in terms of how do you approach going in tomorrow, talking about the news today.
Yeah. Great points. I would contribute the idea that teacher education programs need to help educators also understand how to organize, why it's important to be part of the union, and how to raise your voice in the union, because they have a strategy of convincing predominantly white families that the schools are designed to shame white kids and disparage their own families, right? And to then drive kids out of the public schools, to use that manufactured crisis to label the schools as failing, and then promote charter schools and voucher programs to disrupt public education and to attack teachers' unions as the main organized force that's there to defend public education and educators. And if teachers don't understand the history of the labor movement and how important it is to get involved in your union, then we will be much weaker in defending academic freedom and the ability to teach the truth. The other thing I think we need to have frank conversations with pre-service teachers about is the need for fugitive pedagogy, what Jarvis Givens has called fugitive pedagogy. And in his book by that title, he traces the history of American education through the eyes of Black educators who have always had to teach the truth clandestinely, right? It was long illegal in this country for Black people to learn to read or write, beginning after the Stono Rebellion in 1739, right? The first laws were passed in 1740 to outlaw Black people being literate because they feared what would happen when Black people could use literacy to organize against oppression, right? And David Walker, the great Black abolitionist, observed in 1829 in his classic text, Walker's Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, he said, "For colored people to acquire learning in this country makes tyrants quake and tremble on their sand foundation. Why, what is the matter? They know that their infernal deeds of cruelty will be made known to the world." And I believe that the similar dynamic exists today They were frightened by the 2020 uprising for Black lives that exposed so much of how structural racism functions in our society. And because they couldn't win the debate, they decided that they would just ban us from being able to teach or speak about the legacy of structural racism. And so today's racists aren't so bold as to ban the reading of the word as they did for my ancestors who were enslaved, but they do want to ban the reading of the world, as Paulo Freire put it. They want to ban racial literacy so that students can't understand how our society functions, where systems of power are developed, how oppression is maintained. These are all things that they want to keep students mystified about. And it's something that I think we need to prepare future teachers to understand, that they are in a tradition that stretches back to 1739, when people had to secretly teach enslaved Black people how to read and write, and how they used that literacy to resist the system of slavery. And we're going to have to do the same thing to resist our systems of mass incarceration and structural racism today.
I would agree with my colleagues. I would also say that we should really encourage pre-service teachers to lean on local museums. They do a lot of heavy lifting for us teachers, and they have a way of including a lot of the subject matter that maybe we're not allowed to include. And of course, I remember very vividly my first year teaching, and just how challenging that was, and how valuable that would have been for me. So really utilizing local museums again, and letting them do that heavy lifting. That's what they're there for. They have the resources. They often can then share the stories that students will feel relevant or will feel related to, right? That they can see themselves in, that they can relate to and engage with. The other thing I would say is that we should really make sure that beginning teachers know about the professional organizations such as ours, right? That the way that I was involved in my state affiliate, the Virginia Council for the Social Studies, was because my methods professor suggested it, and she used the NCSS text as part of her class, and was insistent that we go to the conference and become members, and just that network of support, that to know that you're not alone, that others have gone before you and are there to support you, and again, have resources for you, and maybe even just a shoulder to cry on in those stressful moments. It's really important for that, for the mental or the mental state of the teacher too.
Great answers. So the next question I would like to, since we've already answered part of the third question, what do you think we can do now to really work to reclaim the public discourse on social studies and social science education?
We have to advocate. We have to attend local school board meetings. We have to attend boards of education meetings, participate in standards revision processes. Proponents supporting these restrictive and hostile reforms kindly provided us a list of states of where they were going to start to make waves after being in Virginia and DC and Rhode Island. A lot of the places where revisions are in process. So like Alaska, California, Indiana, Maine, Ohio, Oregon, Wyoming, you name it, all of the states that we're going to have to really resist this, again, this restrictive and hostile reform process. I encourage you to look at what's transpiring in Virginia. There's been a lot of collaboration effort between state, local, and national social studies organizations and education advocates that while we haven't been able to change the mind of the board completely, we have stood in solidarity and strengthened our community, and I believe that pieces of our advocacy effort can really be helpful otherwise. Beyond this, I think that we need to reclaim the narrative. invite parents and community members into our classroom to bear witness. And we also need to be really prepared to provide our response when attacked or questioned in what we're doing. NCSS President Shannon Pugh said something in her presidential address, and I'm gonna read it, and then I'll pass the mic. But she says, "quote We are going to have to respond and react. You are going to have to respond and react. But I don't want anyone to do so with urgency. Let's prepare to calmly respond. Let's know our language and be deliberate. Let's be prepared to tell our story of social studies and to seize the narrative from others who seek to diminish us in order to elevate them. So let's get ready to respond and react with intentionality and rationality. Let's share our very public agenda in our own words, not in the words of others." Unquote.
Yeah, we are in a struggle right now, and I think knowing some history is important for people who want to organize and be able to expand students' rights to learn. When my dad was in college, there was almost no education at all about anybody who was a person of color, right? My dad's generation, there were no classes about Black history, about Native history, etc. So how did we start as a country? How did we start telling a more expansive story? How did students come to get to learn about Black history at all, where they have been allowed to? It's because people struggled. My dad linked arms with students on his college campus at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. They led a student strike demanding Black studies on the campus, and they shut the school down until it reopened with a commitment to teaching a fuller history of everybody who's in this country. I think that we need to understand some of the history of how people have struggled so that we can build the struggles needed today to win and push back these anti-democratic laws.
Totally agree with Wesley and Jesse. But we also can never lose hope. We have truth on our side. We have reality on our side. We're fighting people that want to feel good in the moment and have their own identities confirmed by whatever they want to be confirmed with. When we have academia, we have empirical evidence helping us tell what the truth actually is. And like you were saying, Wesley, we need to ally ourselves across the board, top to bottom, local organizations, state organizations, national organizations, but also academically. We need to be allied with higher ed on every level and make sure everybody, every teacher is on the same page academically as well as politically in order for us to win a culture war that we really should win because we have reality on our side. So it is disheartening, but we are not the minority in reality because reality is with us.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something really quick. When you said we have reality with us, it made me think about some of the incredible distortions and lies that they are trying to get us to teach. I don't know if people saw the New York Times article that was an investigative report on Studies Weekly that happened recently, where they saw the proposed change for how to teach about Rosa Parks. And it was absolutely breathtaking because their standard narrative about Rosa Parks was bad enough, right? That trapped her on the bus and didn't tell her entire story. But then they had a proposed change to the curriculum that read like this, quote, Rosa Parks showed courage. One day she rode the bus. She was told to move to a different seat. She did not. She did what she believed was right. And if you'll notice now, there's absolutely no discussion of race and skin color in that. There's not even a mention that she got arrested, that there was a state that was imposing segregation laws. There's absolutely no historical context at all. And when you expose these people for the kind of education that they want to indoctrinate kids with, right, that is a powerful force to compare that with the reality that Rosa Parks was arrested because she was Black, and that this was a state-imposed system of Jim Crow segregation that powerful people today don't want us to learn about, right? They want to tell a fairy tale about America always being just. And if we're going to create a better society, we have to learn the truth.
Jesse, thank you for that example. I wanted to provide a couple that I've noticed in Virginia specifically with the standards that have been proposed. The United States and Virginia history course that's taught to 11th graders would be starting with European exploration. They don't, they discount the entirety of indigenous history to one standard line, combined with European exploration, not on its own. In addition, they continue to insist on teaching Columbus Day and not acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day, despite the fact that that's a federal holiday. So the attack is real, and I appreciate your example. And of course, yes, we need to band together, and we need to lean on each other's expertise and energy to continue the good fight. Like Anthony said, we're on the right side of history, and reality is with us.
So we have about 4 minutes before Jesse unfortunately has to leave us. So at this time, let's open it up to questions from our audience.
All I have to do is raise your hand and I'll open your mic.
Nobody's raising their hand yet.
No, I'm looking at the list right now and, oh, wait a minute, nope. Okay, there we go. Go ahead, Carol. Yeah, got to unmute.
All right. Well, I don't have a question, but I have a couple of thoughts. I thought this was terrific. And I guess Jesse gave examples of things that happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I guess I was aware. I mean, I lost my best 7th grade teacher to McCarthyism. I was president of NCSS in the early 80s when we made the theme for the year, the freedom to teach and the freedom to learn, because of attacks then that were nothing. Well, I shouldn't say that. There were many things that were the same. They did not so clearly come after race. They were going after, left of center and so forth. But I guess from that experience, I wanted to say it's really important. And Wesley, I want to really encourage NCSS putting out those statements. That's important. That every time an NCSS officer gets a chance to give a talk and to focus on that, that's important. And as Bailey was talking about, as NCSS can provide as much professional development as possible, that's really important. One of the things that we did in the 80s that I think was important that I haven't seen, however, is putting forth more attention to the defense fund, which would provide legal assistance so that, well, as an organization, we were filing amicus briefs, but we were also saying, and it was in the spirit of protecting those teachers, that we would help them with initial legal fees. And I think that kind of thing also we're going to need a lot more of right now. The screen's going all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's me. I was just, you asked about statements. And Wesley was kind enough to provide materials exactly related to NCSS statements, and others have too. So I put those all in a Google folder. That's the link. And if you'd like to go to that link, you'll find position statements. I think Jesse was talking about the call to action day, and that's also, those materials are there as well. So that is the URL for that. And if you miss writing that down, just send me an email and I'll be sure to send that to you.
And before Jesse gets to step away, I do want to say, if you have not read, oh, sorry, my blur is on, but if you have not read the amazing book that he's a co-author, co-editor for, this is an amazing book. So yeah, so
Thank you so much, Dean.
You're welcome, Jesse.
Appreciate that. I am going to have to step away. I wanted to just leave people with one more resource, which is Historians on Call. I don't know if you've heard of this effort yet, but Historians for Peace and Democracy has partnered with the Zen Education Project to create a hotline that will allow educators to call in who are facing these kind of challenges, and who are, educators and librarians who are on the front lines of this attack on educational freedom. And so I can leave that info with you as well. Thanks for having me all today, and good luck to everyone in the struggle.
Other comments or questions for the panel?
Charles, while we're waiting for other questions and comments, I just wanted to say thank you to Carol for her leadership, and thank you for the reminder that of the platform that NCSS has, and of course our dedication to this. We have been unwavering in our support for academic freedom and for best practices in teaching and learning, and we will continue to reaffirm that again and again any opportunity we get.
let's see if there are any other
Yep.
questions.
Coming in.
There we go. Excellent.
Sarah?
Hi, thank you. I'm Sarah Demoyne, and I'm really thankful for this panel and for the outreach committee of SSCC who has worked to put it together. I'm curious, because all three of you that are still here on the panel are all teachers and in the classroom. And so I'm curious what conversations any of your students have had or brought up about how they are consuming this climate, how they are understanding and thinking about all of this legislation and restriction and book banning, and how those conversations may be going and how they think about themselves as civic actors in this, in the midst of this time.
So here's something that I'm experiencing that I'm sure my colleagues are too. Anytime you tell, at least for me, I teach mostly seniors and also ninth graders, you tell them they can't do something, or if someone is telling any teenager ever, you're not allowed to do something, that is all they want to do. So I am so encouraged by my students. Whenever we have conversations regarding book banning, they're always so curious and they want to know why. What's so interesting is when in the conversations that I've had with my students and conversations that my colleagues have had with students, there's a similar theme where students are saying things like, hey, we're learning about these things anyway. Why are you preventing us from talking about our own sexual identities in the classroom? Or, hey, that movie that I just watched that all my friends watch are also addressing this history that is being prohibited in my classroom. So why can't we just do it here when this is the safer space? So that's always the conversation that I'm always so encouraged by as an educator. Anthony and I teach seniors, and as Anthony said earlier, it's really it's a unique position to teach seniors or students that are becoming eligible to vote or who are eligible to vote. And for us, in the years that we've been teaching this course, The Global Citizen, where our course's goal is to talk primarily about citizenship, I don't know if students realize the amount of power they have when they advocate, when they go to Board of Ed meetings, especially as a voting member of a Board of Ed, of a local constituency. At least for me, the students that I have are always very eye-opened. And some are taken aback to think that they themselves have power in terms of civic engagement and civic duty with regard to their own education, which again is also very heartwarming. But then by the same token, I'm thinking, well, we're not doing this right. If like this is the first time you're learning that you have power as a member of a voting constituency. So those are just a couple thoughts I have with your question, Sarah. Thank you for asking it. That's a great question.
Yeah, Sarah, excellent question. Bailey, totally concur with everything you're saying. At the same time, though, as teaching high school students who are forming their own identities and their own political identities, being bombarded by so many messages constantly, it's almost like we're also helping them process themselves and the world around them. And we don't know what they just saw on social media. We don't know how they're consuming the last news event. And so we have to have that understanding of the context of where they're coming from and help every student along every level of every part of the political spectrum, wherever they may lie, wherever they think they may lie, help them figure out where they stand and what is best for them, as almost like allowing them to understand the context of the world that they're in to the degree that helps them navigate it and understand how to figure it out for themselves. And like you were saying, Bailey, telling a teenager not to do something will make them want to do it more. And ultimately it'll end up allowing them to really understand all of the forces that are trying to keep them down, which is really what citizenship's all about. We need to speak truth to power. We need to dismantle structures that disempower people. And really that's the bottom line. So it's almost an everyday type of process of trying to situate students within the context of a very confusing world and help them process themselves, their own identities and their own political identities.
We do have another comment coming up. Where did she go?
Charles, while you're waiting, just really quickly, my world history students, the ninth graders, they're so interested in what's going on, and of course are learning about events such as the Cold War, such as World War II, and with the book bannings and with a lot of this top-down control of what we can't do, they're seeing that history is rhyming a little bit and wondering, what. Maybe even having a higher brow conversations and thoughts than our politicians certainly are. Certainly they know more about history than a lot of them. And my government students like Bailey and Anthony, one of the things I think that they vocalize is recognizing more and more this disconnect between reality and elected officials and our political parties. And, like what's going on? Like, do they realize that this is not representative of the population?
Charlotte, you had a question or a comment?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Well, because I'm having more trouble with my technology. All day I've been fighting with my Xfinity, we call it here. I don't know where your guys are wonderful. I'm a colleague of Carol's. She beat me to being president, younger though she was. And I think we got a wonderful group together. I want to say two things. or more than two, a lot, but I just applaud you for what you're doing. I picked up on two words that really struck me as an educator that started out working with elementary teachers and students, and thought that I was going into language arts and teaching that, and then turned to social science because of all the political issues that were there for inclusion then at the time. But language and localization, I think, is really critical. The language you use, the language they use, you've got to turn it around and make it the language that works for us, for you. And so it's not so frightening. They have very frightening language. And localization, bring it down to mean something to the students and the children. Also, I think, Wesley, I think you said, and I think I go back to the poem that talked there, that hold hands. As you go through this, you got to hold hands. Join your organization, stay with SSCC, talk to each other, talk to others, and bring them in. For my whole career, which started long before you were born, most of you, was holding hands with SSCC members, which my husband did before me. And because they wouldn't let us in, who wore at that time skirts and lipstick, but it took until, into the 80s. Well, no, it was the 70s, I'll give them that. And, but my diversion was that I learned so much from in NCSS and SSCC and other organizations with people who knew more than I did. And then I worked with teachers, and I learned so much with teachers. I spent most of my career working with teachers. And then I would go out and talk to my colleagues and come back with something. I would take the teachers to them. So thank you very much. But I must say that you've got a harder row to hoe than we did when Phyllis Schlafly, if you don't know that name, look it up. That was probably one of our main adversary. And I remember sitting in the Supreme Court building with a conference with her when we were doing the bicentennial of the Constitution. And this woman was driving me crazy. So, but if you only got Phyllis to drive you crazy.
There's more of them now.
It's been a while. Look, thank you. This is wonderful.
Thank you, Charlotte. Anne?
Yes. Can you hear me?
You bet. And got unmute.
Yes.
Go for it.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I was just absorbing all the knowledge. I
Oh,
don't know. Yeah. Sorry.
all right. Well, well, you got you have a question or comment, or you just want to?
I've been greatly enjoying this. That's it. I'm no longer in the classroom. So hearing again from my friends and my husband who are still in the classroom and hearing what they're going through and seeing again that the work that y'all have been doing in the classroom is, again, keep it up. And I am, again, very, very thankful that you're in the positions you're in, that you can be doing this work there. So thank you.
I think what we have here is an example of a forced comment, but that's all right. We'll see if we have more volunteers.
Catherine did post a question in the
Oh,
Q&A.
she did. Go ahead.
Yes.
What's the question? Do
She
you see a
wrote,
question? Go ahead.
yeah, she wrote, thanks to the panel, I've learned a lot and been really prompted to think about this issue more deeply. My question is that I'm a teacher educator, and my future teachers are so bothered by the silencing of teachers, but are scared that they'll get fired if they teach for justice while in certain places. So they're asking me if they should censor themselves or just not teach in certain places. What should I tell them to fortify their commitment to teach for justice everywhere?
I think there's a lot of different strategies. Like I think I was explaining before, we need to be allied in our districts with veteran teachers helping new teachers. And I would wonder, practically speaking, if there was a new teacher that wanted to talk about a subject and it so happened to be my prep period or my lunch period or whatever, I could step out and then co-teach with that teacher. That's just a very practical, easy measure. Co-teaching is phenomenal. I love teaching with Bailey. We get to co-teach every day. And that's an aspect to teaching that a lot of times we either ignore, or it's hard to imagine how to make it practical. But those are very on the ground alliances that we need to forge between ourselves so that we could support ourselves that way. So if you're a teacher educator, it's a new teacher that wants to teach about social justice issues, they don't have to be doing it themselves. They're never on an island. We're all in this together. And, you know, we can work with the flexibility of our schedules, work together on the ground to make sure everything is as clear as possible. And like you were saying, Wesley, the communicating with our unions and making sure our unions are backing us up. Those are all things that we need to just be aware of and communicate to new teachers.
And even in states that are right to work states like Virginia, the NEA will have often local chapters that will help. That might not be as effective as in some of our union states, but that certainly is another tool. The local chapter actually provided me insurance. I heard someone talk about defense fund earlier. They provided teachers with insurance if there was a need for that. I would also encourage teachers to have conversations with their administrators to really see where that support lies. If the administrator is supportive of what's happening in the classroom, they're much more likely to support you in any conversation with a district level official, a state official, a parent, et cetera. I think that's really important as well. Lastly, we need teachers everywhere, and all students need to learn about justice. So I hope that the students will go, or the pre-service teachers will go where their hearts send them, regardless of the politics. And I hope that would be a message that would be sent to all pre-service teachers, that really, again, if you're not going to be the one to teach justice to those students, who will?
All right, we have a few minutes left. Are there any other questions? I don't see anyone else asking questions.
I see no hands. That's how great this session was. Answered all the questions.
Yeah. Sarah put in the Q&A, no question, just inspired to keep organizing.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yes, very much so.
Thank you all so much for this platform. This was great.
Thank you all very much. And we'll continue that folder being open on our Google Drive so people can get in and look at all the material that you've provided for them. So that's going to be very useful.
Yep. And a special shout out to Sarah Demoyne, Brandon Haas, Matt Messias, and Ann Perry, who all helped with the outreach committee to help organize this and put this together.
Thank you so much for including me and the perspective of NCSS in this important conversation.
Yes, Sarah.
Thank you. I just wanted to also say that SSEC is also wanting to be a part of this work, and we'll continue to have webinars and events like this. And also, if you are interested, we do have an upcoming conference. So we have a summer conference in Bellingham, Washington, a little bit outside of Seattle. And our conference theme is dismantling spaces of silence. So we're really looking forward to people that are going to present at that. And if this is an organization that you want to be a part of, think with, grow with, and organize with, then really think about membership. Here, we would love to continue to work with all of you and learn from each other. So I wanted to make sure we got that in before people hop off.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and I hope we'll keep in touch for future opportunities. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.